What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. The spooky season is finally upon us. Halloween, one of my favorite times of the year, mostly because that's when a lot of horror stuff gets flooded into the mainstream that isn't always 100% bad like the rest of the year. Most of the horror stuff we get the rest of the year is pretty trash, at least when it comes to movies and shows. Around Halloween, the quality of that stuff does seem to step up at least a little bit. Anyway, I was thinking what I might do is give you some recommendations for Goosebumps books that actually still chill me or even disturb me in some cases as an adult. I've kind of already made this video. I made it about a year ago actually on my older channel. I ended up taking it down from there because that channel is exclusively writing videos now, but I'm bringing it back and I'm going to show you in today's video my favorite Goosebumps classics that I think you can still enjoy just as much today as we did back then. Very, very quickly, I do want to give a bit of a self-plug. I don't think I've ever done that on this channel before, but I'm gonna do it now. Myself and a bunch of other YouTubers just published this. It's an anthology of horror short stories. All of the short stories are themed around vacation and travel, and if I can be so bold, I really do think this is a great collection. Myself and 12 other YouTubers slash writers have stories in here, so it's pretty chunky, and it covers a lot of different subgenres of horror, so I think there's something for everyone. If you want a book to spice up your Halloween, this might be it, and even better, all of the profits for this actually go to charity. All of the profits for We're Not Home will be going towards Books in Homes, which is a foundation in Australia that basically raises money to send out books and educational material to communities that can't easily access them. It's a really great cause, a really great collection. Check it out if you want to. You'll find a link in the description. Otherwise, let's get into the Goosebumps recommendations. Like a lot of people, especially my fellow millennials, my first exposure to spooky fiction was the iconic series from the four-head mole sporting legend R.L. Stine. I am, of course, talking about Goosebumps. There was a time when I would kick back after school with my Bubble-O Bill and read one of the books that I'd managed to convince my mum to buy for me from the Scholastic Book Fair. And when it came to Goosebumps, I had quite a few of their classic collection. I remember I had these Goosebumps cassette tapes. They were white with like the purple logo. That's how I experienced a lot of those stories back then. And while today those dramatic readings and wacky sound effects might seem a bit theatrical or corny, back then they worked. They were terrifying. They gave me nightmares for days. I loved it. Anyway, I'm sure you're more than familiar with what Goosebumps is. They are globally recognizable from their iconic and incredible artwork and the cautiously dark themes of their stories. So for today, I want to take a bit of a trip back through time. I want to go back to my childhood so that young me can tell you all about which of the Goosebumps books chilled me the most. But I do have to make it quick. There's a Yu-Gi-Oh match after school and I don't want to brag, but I've got a pretty rockin' deck. A Night in Terror Tower, I feel, is probably one of the most well-known and recognizable Goosebumps books. You will usually find it as part of any of the collections on eBay. Although, with that said, I don't see many people mentioning it as one of the scariest. Let me tell you why it spooked me so badly. Sue and Eddie are a brother and sister, two young children taking a trip through London. Their parents are in a big meeting, so they decide to join a tour group that is taking them through a trip of Terror Tower, a tall, spiraling part of an ancient castle filled to the brim with torture devices and dark corners. After being separated from their tour group, they find themselves being chased through the castle by a mysterious man in a black hat. The man claims that he knows who they are and that they have to come with him or else. They do escape a few times, but eventually the man does catch them, and with 3 mysterious stones, he manages to transport them back through time. It's at this point that Sue and Eddie find out the truth. They find out why this man, the executioner, is after them. That's basically a spoiler-free summary of A Night in Terror Tower, and I know what you're thinking. It's not that scary. Well, okay, tough guy, how about this? Dale. That's what I thought. Understanding why this story is so horrifying, especially to children, is going to involve a few spoilers. But to be honest, at this point, the book came out like 25 years ago, so you may as well just go with it. That way people don't tease you for living under a rock. I'm sure a very beautiful rock. See, the crux of the story is that Sue and Eddie are actually a prince and princess from medieval England. They had been transported to the future by a wizard to escape a wrongful execution. Now, you don't find that fact out until the end of the story, but it does make for some situations that are quite chilling, especially as a kid. That whole idea might seem like a bit of a complex fantasy twist to put in such a short children's horror book, but you're forgetting one thing. R.L. Stine is a really good writer. He made it work. For its time, A Night in Terror Tower has some pretty vivid and intense descriptions of torture devices, and while they're not explicitly graphic, it did leave very little to the imagination. Having two scared children run from an actual executioner through a Pan's Labyrinth of medieval corridors and mysterious staircases was pretty terrifying in its own right. However, most importantly, and perhaps I am just reaching here, but I think this story is pretty close to being the most child-friendly version of a psychological horror that I've found. Let me explain. There is a scene where the children go to the hotel before they find out, their actual history. They go to the hotel to find their parents, but the clerk at the hotel says no one's checked into their room, and when the clerk asks for their last name, Sue and Eddie realize they don't know their last name. They don't even remember what they did yesterday or the day before. At that point in the story, you don't know what the twist is, and it's pretty creepy. The last thing I want to mention about A Night in Terror Tower is that there is a particular scene where Sue and Eddie are in their cell, quite simply waiting for the guards to come in and smother them to death. It's a hauntingly dark and mortal moment as far as Goosebumps goes, and that's always kind of stayed with me. The Cuckoo Clock of Doom is another Goosebumps story that strays away from the simple scare or monster, and instead toys with some much darker themes. In fact, I would argue that the Cuckoo Clock of Doom had one of the most bleak endings in Goosebumps history. Michael doesn't like his little sister Tara. She's a total brat. She's always messing with him and then letting him take the fall. This really reaches a boiling point on Michael's 12th birthday when she opens his gifts, scratches his new bike, tells his crush that he likes her, and even destroys his cake, and she gets away with all of it. But Michael sees an opportunity to get back at her. His dad just bought a new antique cuckoo clock, and his dad got very angry when his little sister was toying with it. So that night, Michael goes downstairs intending to mess with the cuckoo clock so that his sister can finally take the blame. He turns the dial back and messes with the little bird's head, but when he wakes up the next day, something is terribly wrong. History is repeating itself. Every time Michael wakes up, he finds that he is further and further back in the past. This continues until he is quite literally a baby again, and his parents end up taking him into an antique store where he sees that cuckoo clock, and he decides this is the moment to try and fix everything. He manages to turn the dial back while his parents are distracted, and to his delight, he wakes up the next day as a 12-year-old again. Everything is back to normal except for one thing. His little sister Tara is nowhere to be seen. His little sister Tara doesn't exist. I think reading this as a kid, I didn't quite understand just what the horror was that I was actually feeling here, because there was no actual antagonist, so to speak. In retrospect, that horror that I think I was feeling was existentialism. The primary fear here is Michael being unborn, being erased from existence. This is a fear that, ironically, becomes more and more prevalent the older you get. And ultimately, that is exactly what ends up happening to Michael's little sister. I was gonna leave Don't Go to Sleep for last because I feel that this is truly one of the most underrated and terrifying stories in the entire Goosebumps catalogue. But this is also around the point in the video that most people click away, so I'm moving it up. 12-year-old Matt is the youngest in his family, and he's constantly being picked on by his older siblings. One day he asks his mum if he can swap his small, tiny, cramped bedroom for the larger guest bedroom as some kind of small victory for himself. She says no, but he decides to sleep in that room anyway. The problem is, when he wakes up, he finds that he is now in a completely different reality. Now he is the oldest sibling, and the next day when he wakes up, his family are completely different people. The day after that, reality has shifted even more. And worst of all, through all of this, there are two men that seem to be chasing him through each of these realities, getting closer and closer by the day. Eventually, it's explained to Matt that he has created a tear through space and time when he slept in that room, and in order to make things right again, those two men have to put him to sleep. Permanently. I loved this book so much when I was a kid. I thought it was just such a wild and disturbing concept. Like I said, I really do think that this is one of the most underrated and chilling Goosebumps stories, because like the last one, it dives into some pretty dark motifs. Isolation is probably the biggest one. Every single day that Matt wakes up, he finds himself further and further removed from people that he knows, people that he trusts, and also further and further removed from a world that he recognizes. He's confused, terrified, and alone, and he has no idea how to fix it. There's also one scene where he's captured and the men are brewing the potion that's meant to put him to sleep forever, and like A Night in Terror Tower, it's surprisingly morbid as Matt struggles with the idea of never waking up. Before the subpar horror movie that was Polaroid, there was Say Cheese and Die. The premise is pretty simple and perhaps not as philosophical as most of the other stories that I've mentioned so far. Greg and his friends break into a supposedly haunted house and they find a camera. Every time they take a picture with this camera, it shows them a prediction of the future. A future that always comes true. Now, the fear here is admittedly pretty simple paranormal spookiness. But at the time, the concept was so unique that it managed to make pretty much an entire generation second guess taking photos with their friends. And we're talking about a generation that thrived on disposable cameras. We couldn't just take the photo and then check it out. We had to wait a day or two to see what they actually looked like. The interesting thing with Say Cheese and Die though is that it's a bit of an ethical conundrum. When you take a photo with a camera, something bad always happens. But is the camera causing these bad things to happen? Or is it giving you a warning? There's over 200 Goosebumps books, over 30 classics, so these of course aren't all of my favorites, they're just some of the ones that have really stuck with me the longest. The ones that are the most memorable. What was your favorite Goosebumps book? And we haven't even gone into the TV show because that's a whole other thing. The Haunted Mask episode, one of the scariest things I ever experienced as a child. Thanks so much for watching, guys, especially for watching through the whole video. Again, you can find a link to We're Not Home in the description below. Raises money for charity, should spice up your Halloween. Otherwise, I make weekly videos on fantasy and horror books. I do deep dives, discussions, video essays. So if that's your kind of thing, I would love it if you stuck around. I hope you have a great, spooky, and safe Halloween, and I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.